Hello and welcome to Pedagogical Partnerships with Libraries and Museums. This is the sixth and final session of Teaching in Unprecedented Times, a Fall 2020 showcase. This January 12th to 14th showcase has been brought to you by Harvard's Office of the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning in partnership with teaching and learning centers across the university. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. All sessions will be recorded, captions, and posted to our website in the coming weeks. During the opening presentations today, use the chat function only to contact technical support, but there will be opportunities to submit and ask questions once we get further into the session. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. This event is titled Pedagogical Partnerships with Libraries and Museums because libraries and museums are far more than just buildings. Despite limited in-person access, librarians, museums, educators, and faculty have been partnering actively in the remote teaching and learning environment. So today we'll get a picture of how these collaborations have worked in the classroom. Our panelists will walk you through a range of illustrative examples, showcasing ways the libraries and museums have amplified student learning and engagement with their collections, digital tools and platforms, and customized learning supports. We're fortunate today to have with us 6 leaders and specialists, whom I'll introduce alphabetically. Katherine Beaty is a book conservator for special collection at the Weissman Preservation Center for the Harvard Library. She has a special interest in parchment, non-Western bindings, and investigating historical book structures. She works closely with curators, librarians, and imaging staff to preserve Harvard's collection for posterity. Fred Burchsted is Harvard Library Liaison to the History and History of Science departments, the American Studies Program, and the Warren Center. He gives library resources classes, answers questions, provides individual consultations for these departments and programs, and for anyone working in these areas. Bonnie Burns is the head of Geospatial Resources at the Harvard Map Collection. She oversees both the digital and the paper aspects of the map collection. She's been at Harvard for over 20 years, assisting faculty, staff, and students to access and use geospatial materials of all kinds. Ramona Crawford is head of Academic Partnerships and the Services for Academic Programs Unit at Harvard Library. Ramona promotes the development of research literacy among Harvard students in the FAS by leading faculty outreach initiatives and participating in the library's teaching and liaison services. Lainey Schultz is the Academic Partnerships Coordinator at the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. She assists the Harvard community in physically and intellectually accessing collections in the museum's care in support of university teaching and research. Lainey's own work focuses on Indigenous rights and museum anthropology. And last, alphabetically, but first speaking, is Jen Thum, the Assistant Director of Academic Engagement and Assistant Research Curator at the Harvard Art Museums. Jen collaborates with faculty across the university to create interdisciplinary learning experiences for their students. Jen is a specialist in ancient Egyptian art and teaches the Museum Studies program at Harvard Extension School. So without further ado, let's begin thinking about pedagogical partnerships with libraries and museums. Jen, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm Jen, as you just heard. I'm the Assistant Director of Academic Engagement and Assistant Research Curator at the Harvard Art Museums. And I'm going to speak today on behalf of my colleague, Laura Muir, as well. She's here and she'll be dropping some links in the chat as we go. If you're not familiar with the Harvard Art Museums, I want to encourage you to start here at harvard.art/from-home, which Laura is going to drop in the chat, to see what we have to offer in the remote space, everything from lectures to coloring books to live student guide tours. Just a quick bit about us and what makes us special. We have our entire collection digitized online. We are the Harvard Art Museums, plural, because we're 3 museums in one building. We have one of the largest collections in the United States with 250,000 works across time and place. We have an art study center where we'll take things out for you that are not on view, whatever your reason is for wanting to see them. We have a world famous pigment and binder collection. It's like a reference library of pigments and binders. We have in-house conservation and conservation science. And when we're open to the public and we're free for all students, regardless of where they go to school. So today I'm going to give you a snapshot of the work that we've done this past semester, but I'm hoping you'll all come away learning a bit more about who we are and what we do more broadly, and that this will kind of energize you to explore the possibility of working with us in the future. So let's talk about fall 2020. Over the past 2 years, each semester, about 60 to 70 different courses from across the university have worked with our collections in some way. And we actually had an upward trend before the pandemic. So some of the courses that work with us use the collections on their own. Some faculty start by brainstorming with museum staff, and many have museum staff visit their classes to discuss works of art directly with their students. Some classes interact with the museums more than once during a semester, and some also have assignments that are based in our collections. And you can see here what moving online initially did to our curricular engagement, but in fall 2020, we bounced back with 45 different Harvard courses working with us. And that's pretty remarkable considering that we haven't had access to a building. So all of that is digital. And the picture can only be better than what you see here because this is what we have data on. And we know that faculty every semester use the collections on their own, so the numbers are likely higher than this. So maybe you're thinking, how is it possible that there are 74 or even 45 courses that intersect with the art museums? If there's one message that I can send away with you today, it's that the art museums are not the domain of art history alone. The collaborations that I just referenced range across the university and across many disciplines. In fall 2020, faculty from 26 different departments and centers used our collections in their teaching. And the diversity of subjects that you see here is pretty typical for us, but going remote sent more people our way than you might expect. That's because I think working with objects offers something visually and intellectually fresh and exciting in the era of Zoom. For faculty, it's the chance to give their students different kinds of primary sources to learn from and to do so in ways that are pedagogically diverse. The museums are a place for students to work with art as a primary source, to give concrete expression to their ideas, to illustrate their arguments, and to build practical and analytical skills. And we're doing that in courses from departments like Mind, Brain, and Behavior, and Earth and Planetary Sciences, and Harvard Business School, which you might not expect. These are some of the classes that use our collections remotely this semester, and all the ones that I put on this list were visited live by museum staff. It's not only curators who join classes to speak with students. They're also postgraduate fellows, conservators, conservation scientists, art photographers, staff who work with our data, and others. So these visits give us a chance to showcase the breadth of museum labor and to introduce students to the people who make museums run. And I also want to note that around a dozen of these classes were Gen Eds or freshman seminars. So I want to encourage anyone who's teaching one of those types of courses to think of us as a willing partner. Both Gen Eds and freshman seminars give us the chance to reach new students and students who are unfamiliar with art or museums, who maybe don't yet feel comfortable in the museum space, and to make them feel welcome and a part of our community, no matter what their concentration ends up being. So there really are two goals for our teaching. The first is to make meaningful connections between the content and the arc of a course and the collections that we steward. But the second is arguably more important, or it underlies everything else we do, and that's to communicate to students that museums are for everyone and that they already have enough knowledge to engage with our collections purely from their lived experience. And with that, I want to share just a few shiny examples from our collaborations this fall semester. And you see here appropriately a photo of our shiny silver cabinet. So the first example is Giovani Batsana's Stories from the End of the World, which we at the museums affectionately refer to as the Apocalypses class. We first worked with this course in person last year. And back then, in the before times, it was already the largest class we'd ever worked with 150 students. But this year, a lot of students had the end of the world on their minds, so it was even more popular. And in the end, 431 students attended one of 2 live virtual museum visits for this class. That's more students than we could ever hope to reach through a single course. So how do you get hundreds of students at a time to engage meaningfully with a work of art? We did this in 2 ways. The first was with a flipped classroom. So here you see my colleague Katherine talking about our drip painting by Jackson Pollock. It's called Number 2, which the artist painted in response to the nuclear age, if you're wondering what the apocalypse connection is. Beyond the usual high-res images that exist for almost all of the works in our collection, Thanks to our in-house conservation center, we also happen to have a series of raking light images that allowed students to explore the surface texture of this canvas using a special program. We asked them to look at both types of images in advance of the visit. And that extra time to look on their own gave them this ability to conduct a more detailed personal investigation of how this monumental painting, which is 9 feet tall and doesn't fit comfortably on a PowerPoint slide, was constructed. And when it came time to discuss as a group at the beginning of class, students made observations that clearly drew on their extended time spent exploring the topography of this work. The second technique we use for this class has become a favorite for us, sending students into breakout rooms in small groups, on their own though, so they don't feel like they're being watched by museum staff, with a series of prompts. So this gives them a chance to express themselves verbally and engage with their peers, even if the class is really large. When students return to the main room, we ask a spokesperson from each group to report back in response to the prompts, and that helps to start the discussion. So here you see students discussing David Alfaro Siqueiros' El Fin del Mundo, or The End of the World, which is an obvious choice for this class. And here we are discussing Botticelli's mystic Crucifixion, which is an apocalyptic vision of Florence. With this painting, which isn't in great shape, we can see details online that would otherwise be really hard to recognize in person. So that's the silver lining to teaching remotely. We get the chance to use works of art that really shine in the online space, ones where the details and textures can really be appreciated through close looking at high resolution images. And as you can see in the chat, students really enjoyed this. One of them described our close looking as being like I Spy. So despite this enormous class size, we used different tools and teaching strategies to make sure that every student had the chance to look closely and engage in small group discussion and to have their voice heard. Second example is Jerry Mitrovica's course in Earth and Planetary Sciences, where my colleagues in the ceramics program and conservation science explained how clay works and how the same scientific technologies that we use to investigate geological materials can be used to investigate works of art that are made from those same materials. Here, for example, is a super magnified portion of one of our terracotta models by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Maybe not something you would expect to find in a STEM class. This semester, we also taught for many classes related to COVID and issues of health, including Karen Thornburg's Disease, Illness, and Health Through Literature. What you see here is a screenshot of a fabulous feature of our website, the collections tool, where we or faculty or students or anyone, members of the public, you, can compile a visual list of works on a given theme. Since we went remote, we've really started to put this tool to use. So the students chose all of the works that we looked at for this class from a selection that Laura compiled called COVID in the Collections, which she's going to put the link to in the chat right now. So giving students the chance to choose what they wanted to learn about during their visit gave them more agency, and that suggests that they'll then be more invested in the experience. So here, for example, you see my colleague Joanna giving them a close look at this tiny Rembrandt etching of a quacksalver. That's where we get the word quack from, if you're thinking about the medical connection. And she said that she wouldn't have thought to choose this work. So giving students a chance to choose their own adventure also helps us make more equitable use of our collections. We're often engaging with timely contemporary issues in the museums, and that was especially true this semester, not just in relation to COVID, but also to social justice. So my last example is Shai Dromi's tutorial on sociological theory, a course that critiques the canon in sociology. And we found parallels to this sort of institutional critique with the work of the artist and journalist Alexandra Bell, which you see Laura teaching with here. Bell highlighted and redacted portions of the daily news coverage of the Central Park 5 case from the 1980s in order to expose its racism in a series of 20 prints that we acquired just last year. So we put those prints to work right away for this class. And beyond our discussion, We gave space for students to hear from the artist in her own words in a recorded interview that we watched together. So bringing supplementary digital materials into dialogue with our collections turned out to be another perk of teaching in the online space. Beyond Bell's prints, I want to mention that we also looked at works by Fred Wilson and Carrie James Marshall for this class. They're both artists of color who interrogate who belongs and who is represented in museums. In the case of this work by Marshall, its monumental size would have prohibited us from viewing the whole thing in person in the Art Study Center, but online, it was perfect. Professor Dromey commented very kindly that the visit enhanced his class on every level, giving students something tangible to connect to the course themes, and that when they returned to the normal sessions, they were energized and they had this clear understanding of the need for all of us to rethink our canons. So we've been sending surveys to faculty to collect comments like this, and the responses have really underscored the importance of this work. Some faculty tell us that students feel personally impacted by looking at art with us, and others speak to the enthusiasm of our staff with their own enthusiasm, lots of all caps, which I really appreciate. More importantly, we've also been collecting feedback from students. Some of them have commented explicitly about what it's like to look at art online and how their virtual visits have made them even more excited to visit the museums in person in the near future, which is exactly what we were hoping to see. And my favorite comment from a student who's concentrating in computer science: please collaborate with more classes across the college. Will do. So we've learned a lot from teaching remotely, and we want to carry some of that forward even when we reopen. And that includes using more digital media when we teach with our collections, using material from other collections, including Harvard museums and libraries alongside our own material, using that collections tool and also some of our digital tools to increase student agency, doing more with flipped classrooms, and being more diligent about collecting data and feedback on our teaching. And if you're interested in the resources that we have for remote teaching, they're all neatly packaged at this URL, which Laura is going to drop in the chat. And if you're thinking of using our collections, but you don't know where to start, that's okay. You can feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to provide guidance, and we can work with you to determine what makes the most sense for your class. And of course, the museums are open for you to explore for your own enjoyment too. Thanks so much. And Lainey, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Jen. I have a slightly different narrative of this past semester than the one that Jen just provided, though there's a lot of really significant dovetailing that hopefully I'll remember to point out as we go along. So for those of you who may never have visited us or may just not know us very well, here is the Peabody Museum in all of its sunshiny glory. We're located just a bit down the street from the art museums, close to the Science Center, across from Harvard Yenching Institute, if I've given you enough landmarks to help orient you. The museum has in its care close to 1.25 million items, representing all human inhabited continents, so basically nothing from Antarctica, and collections that are recent, created in the past few years, spanning back to, I believe, 1 to 1.5 million years ago. I have heard tell of something older than that, but the oldest item that I have personally touched is 1 to 1.5 million years old. So that's where I'll stop it. A typical semester from the olden days of yore for us would see us working with about 20 to 30 different classes a semester, ranging across disciplines and divisions across the university. Some of these classes would come multiple times during the semester. Very rarely do they happen inside the galleries. The classes that we work directly with will be in storage itself or in one of our collections viewing rooms, so that we're able to really give students a close personal interactive with collections. We don't unfortunately have many photographs of classes taking place, but here you can get just a small sense of what storage is like and what it can mean to be with an item right there in front of you on a table. The way that we interact with these classes also has a bit of a variation. For some of them, they are taught by the instructors themselves, the faculty or the TFs, and what we're doing is moving the collections from storage to a teaching space so that we're providing access in that manner. Other times, museum staff are providing guest lectures on particular course content or content topics. We also support student research for class assignments. So again, getting a specific item in front of a student and then bringing with it the associated documentation so that they can do that primary source research. And then we also have classes that are collections exercise based. So this semester worked a little bit differently for us, not drastically, but drastically. In total, we worked with about 17 different classes. We were able still to provide the self-taught collections access as we did before, this time through high-resolution images and 3D scans of collections. We're also really fortunate that we have all of our associated documentation already digitized so that we could continue to support class assignments through, again, high-res images and PDFs of the associated documentation. And staff was also continued to be invited to provide guest lectures on specific topics to classes. What we were missing were the collections-based exercises. And that was initially surprising to me, if only because, as Jen said, people wanted activities for Zoom. I would have thought that classes that we might not have worked with otherwise might have thought to reach out to us just in search of relief from Zoom fatigue. And that really did not happen. I think that AP can take some responsibility for that. The only certainties that we had going into this semester were that all of our usual activities were going to take us much longer than usual, and that at some point during the semester, the one other person who works full-time with me in the department was going to be disappearing on parental leave. So we were admittedly very cautious in doing outreach prior to the start of the semester, and that could have had its impact. It's also possible that given the digital nature of life now, things are a bit more self-accessible. Like the art museums, our collections are all digitized. They're available online. Unfortunately, high-res images aren't available online, but if a class was happy working with the low-res images, who knows what they could have done without our awareness. I'm personally a bit skeptical that that happened, but I'm willing to conceive that that could have happened. So overall, my feeling is that something really was being communicated to us this semester, even if I'm not entirely confident in what that something was. But it's given me a lot of pause for reflection. And what I suspect is happening is confirmation of our suspicions that we are primarily being viewed as a subject space. So maybe similar to how I might perceive of a place like the MCZ or Beria, and I apologize to my colleagues there if I am inadvertently misunderstanding them. But that the people are thinking of, I go to the Peabody Museum, if I'm teaching a class on archaeology, if we're learning about mokshe vessels and I want to show my students mokshe vessels. And not thinking about the Peabody Museum as a space for, very similar to what Jen described at the art museums. I'm going to steal her line that the Peabody Museum is relevant for every discipline, where really the value of it is in the skills that you generate, the analytical abilities, the discussions that can happen there, the multiplication of questions that you can provide there. I tend personally to work with a lot of these collections exercise-based classes. That's also why I really missed them this semester. I personally enjoy them quite a bit. But I really think that's where the greatest relevance of a space like the Peabody is expressed, and the greatest contribution that this museum can make to Harvard pedagogy is in really having these opportunities through our conversations there to bring to the surface some of the assumptions that we're bringing to our interpretation, some of the biases or the personal experiences that are coloring our social imaginings, and that in the experience of expressing those, there's the opportunity then to open up possibilities for further knowledges, to have space in a structure that historically and still today does not very well accommodate all these different perspectives. This is my soapbox bit. This is where I care about this space. And so this is, I think, for me, one of the biggest takeaways of the semester is this really confronting, I can't turn my face away realization that probably I need to rethink strategies for how I'm communicating to faculty, to classes, to staff, in expressing what possibilities there are here and why it's so valuable as a pedagogical partnership to be strengthening and building, so that we're really offering expanded learning opportunities to our students. Rather than subject you to further of my navel gazing, I do want to highlight one class that we worked with that really stands an exception to this. And here I've highlighted it for you. This is not a class that I actually personally worked with. I'm sharing with you, with her permission, the work of my colleague, Lauren Burgess, who worked in rethinking, reconfiguring one of the sections in this Gen Ed class, Can We Know Our Past? Which previously was Anthro 1010, Introduction to Archaeology. So it's a class that we've had opportunity to work with for some years now. And one lab that has proven consistently difficult for this class has been its Osteology Lab. I think there are very clear reasons why this is such a challenging lab. To begin with, just that osteology is a specialized area of study, and the students in this class are beginners. And so scaling down what students need to know to be able to learn in this environment is itself a challenge. And then you add to that these are human individuals who are coming to class, and the discomfort that can produce, and that needs to be felt and experienced, but then can interrupt the learning process when you only have an hour-long section together. But also reinforcing really the significance of thinking through our pedagogical goals and how are we getting our students where we need them to go, which is important always, but is all the more crucial when it's that learning outcome that justifies the presence of these human remains in the classroom. So if we can't accomplish them, we really need to rethink things. And moving to the remote environment provided the forced stop that I think we all really needed to reassess this lab. So Lauren worked with one of the members of the instructional staff for this class, and what they decided their goals were was to help students understand the ways that the bodily impacts, the histories that get written onto our physical bones are not only the products of our individual experiences, but have cultural and social effect. And the way they decided to approach this was through high-res photographs and 3D images. And I hope that you can all understand why I'm not sharing these images with you in this particular context, but I do understand that they could be relevant to some of you to understand how this class worked. So please feel free to reach out to me directly and I will share those with you. With these, they decided to pare down the topics that they were going to cover. They wanted to look specifically at labor and health. They wanted to look at age and lifestyle. And They also had an exercise on morphological sexing, using a combination of, again, high-res photos and 3D images of pelvis. For the labor and health, they looked at comparative scans of radius, humerus, and ulna that from a non-arthritic individual and from an individual with arthritis. And then they looked at age and lifestyle through images of different teeth dentition with different signs of wear, caries, abscesses. And in our post-semester evaluation, the feedback that we received was that this was incredibly successful, that the students were really able to get a much better handle on the materials actually through the digital technologies, in large part because in the classroom itself, where you have these skeletal remains in front of you, the only person potentially touching them actually is the TF. We don't have the students handle really anything for any of our classes in the classroom setting. You have to come to do your own individual research, but it's too hard for us to teach and monitor handling behaviors at the same time. So in the classroom setting, no one's actually touching anything. And you really need to manipulate, maneuver these bones in order to catch the nuance of variation necessary then for the diagnostics. And you can do that with a 3D model with your hands, as the instructor called them. So it actually was for all that we tend to emphasize the necessity of the real thing and the difference that happens when you flatten something into an image, it was really much more effective as a learning tool than the human remains themselves. And it did provide, as I mentioned, that necessary distance for students in all of the osteology classes or the classes using osteological remains. The staff is very careful to remind students and instructors that these are human individuals and that they needed to be respected as such, and that remained the same in the digital realm. So I would still emphasize, and I think the students understood that they were still learning directly from human individuals, but the digital format provided an emotionally helpful distance for them to think through how they were comfortable learning in this manner, and if they were comfortable in learning in this manner, and then moving forward with that. The final kind of summary of the experience, the instructor, and I will quote here, the experience was successful in a way that improved upon the difficulties encountered in prior iterations. Overall, not only did these changes improve our pedagogical focus, the tools and materials we used aided students in better understanding the purpose of this discipline as a method of studying the past. I can't hope for a better outcome than that. I feel like that was phenomenal. And regardless of whether the instructors choose to continue with this format, I don't know, largely because I have not yet asked them. I think for us at the museum, this is a really informative experience in showing to us what these different tools can accomplish in different kinds of situations so that we can think carefully and thoughtfully about what might be the best approach for any particular class, and make those recommendations accordingly to the faculty we work with so that we can really hopefully maximize the learning outcomes in these experiences. I know I personally have really felt uncomfortable with 3D models. I don't like the alienating distancing I feel like they produce in separating collections from reality, from all their many relationships, but I'm now rethinking that. So possibly my takeaway from the semester is that I have a lot more work to do, but hopefully that will only take us in positive directions. And with that, I will hand things over to Katherine.
Thank you very much, Lainey. I'd like to share with you the intersection of the Gen Ed course 1034 Text in Transition with the Harvard Library this past fall. This course of about 45 or so students was taught by Ann Blair, professor of history, and Leah Whittington, professor of English. The central question of the course was interpreted through material and culture. What media are durable and how are texts preserved? What are the changing attitudes towards content and what role do institutions play in the history of an object? Given all this, of course, the course drew heavily on special collections across campus to understand how institutions influence a text's survival and use. The students visited the Harvard University archives to learn about concepts such as appraising and arranging archives, and received a guest lecture from Dorothy Berry to learn about collecting and interpreting Black history. There were 2 sessions at Houghton with Houghton staff where the students worked closely with digitized books in breakout rooms to search for evidence of use and construction and identify materials used and to discuss what the book's condition suggests about its use over time. These sessions set the stage for the Weissman Preservation Center to build an even deeper understanding of materiality later in the term. The Weissman Preservation Center is home to 20 paper, photograph, and book conservators and technicians who serve the library's special collections. The Conservation Lab is normally not open to the public, so an immersive visit to such a behind-the-scenes location is always a highlight of the class. In 2019, the Text in Transition visited the Conservation Lab in person. The class experience there blended hands-on activities related to conservation and material examination with the opportunity to look closely at objects from a conservator's point of view. Taking this class virtual meant that we had to reimagine how to give students a similarly rich experience through Zoom. I wanted to stop for a moment and mention the team of conservation staff that worked together to prepare everything for this one session of the course. Together, these 9 conservators spent over 150 hours for preparing for this one class. Before the actual class, the students were supplied with a list of recommended readings and a glossary. And in order to provide a more hands-on component to this virtual semester, we created 2 extracurricular activities. One was a light fading test to understand the effects of light on library collections. Students were supplied with paper and parchment samples and instructions on setting up and evaluating the experiment at home. We then checked in on the results during the class, and the reactions were really quite dramatic. And then the second activity was a pamphlet sewing workshop, which you see on the bottom. Students were supplied with a kit and an asynchronous tutorial video was created. The students could follow the video on their own time or attend a virtual pamphlet sewing session with our conservation staff. We split up into breakout rooms to allow our staff to guide a smaller group of students through the process of making their own pamphlet. For the live class, we tried to recreate the experience of visiting the Conservation Lab in person. We used actual special collections materials and handled them live for the Zoom class, which presented many challenges. There were 3 stations set up to address different conservation concepts, and we were spread safely around the lab following all the safety protocols necessary. The first session focused on inherent vice and natural aging and accidental damage. Utilizing our study collection of deaccessioned circulating materials, Amanda Maloney provided context for certain types of damages. The goals were to learn how to look closely at objects and explain how library preservation can mitigate deterioration through housing, handling, and the environment. You can see in the image on the left, our setup with multiple light sources and cameras to give the students the best viewing experience. We had to rehearse moving things in and out of the camera for the safety of the object, but also to determine which objects translated best to this virtual platform. The next station's theme was materiality and conservation with a focus on parchment as a material and showing a collection of English deeds from the Harvard Library. which are written on parchment. I began by unrolling the parchment so the students could experience the sound of the skins, and then discuss various features and how that related to the animals. Then I'll transition, and then the deeds, when we bring them out, here we go. We looked closely together to identify features of the parchment that could be seen in the manuscripts. We discussed how the deeds were made and the historical importance of wax seals and the conservation of these kinds of objects. I wanted as much as possible to give the students the experience virtually of handling these materials in a sort of an up-close manner as much as possible, but obviously there are limitations. One advantage of the virtual experience is that the students could see exactly from our perspective what we are trying to show them in a way that we can't really achieve when the whole group is in person, huddled around a table and looking over each other's shoulders. So that is ultimately a huge advantage of this format. In the final station, focused on the conservation treatment and technology, and showed how conservators use tools such as dental tools and microscopes to stabilize fragile illuminated manuscripts. Alan Puglia was able to utilize the versatility of the hover cam to not only show the manuscripts overhead, but also pivot the camera so that the students could have a more immersive experience by looking into the conservation lab and seeing the microscope station and more fully immerse them into our space. The main challenges that we faced in presenting virtually was choosing objects that translated well over video and choreographing how to show objects safely. We experimented with different camera setups and whether to share our screen or ask the class to pin a speaker, and other Zoom nuances. It was quite a learning curve. And having 4 presenters in one space meant practicing with our chosen technologies and remembering to mute ourselves and choreographing our transition to make the class a seamless sort of hour and 15-minute experience for the students. Outside of text and transitions, in January of 2020, we assisted with a J-term class offered by the music library. And this was a student-curated exhibition titled Global Bagpipe. Preservation Services staff engaged with the students to review their choices, discuss the preservation role in exhibit planning, help the students measure and make their own book cradles and mounts, and finally install their own exhibit. We've helped with similar student exhibits associated with courses such as the freshman seminar at the Divinity Library on Christianity and slavery. In the past, classes have visited the Conservation Lab for general tours, but which often include a little hands-on activity. But many other classes have asked for full bookbinding workshops, which can be offered at many different skill levels. And this past year, we've been able to show that these activities can be translated on some level to the virtual classroom. We have many other services that I just want to sort of highlight, just like in the museums, that we can offer in conservation and preservation as resources for the classroom. We have technical imaging abilities, including looking at things through magnification or with special light, such as ultraviolet or infrared. Common in the forensic field, we have a visual spectral comparator, which can reveal many nuances of a document. And material analysis is a possibility as well in our department, including pigment and fiber identification and XRF spectroscopy to determine the elemental composition of an object, which can be really enlightening for the students. And finally, I'm talking a lot about the Weissman Preservation Center, but really we're just a small section of a much larger department of preservation services, which is collectively responsible for ensuring the longevity and usability of millions of physical and digital objects held in the Harvard Library collections. From stabilizing historical materials on paper or preparing color-faded 16mm films for digitization to maintaining the usability of over 10 million digital objects, our expert staff preserve a wide range of collections for use by students, faculty, and researchers now and into the future. So Preservation Services offers interactive learning opportunities for classes to supplement course content and provide enlightening and interdisciplinary perspectives on Harvard Library materials. So you can find more information about our activities here, and please do reach out to us with any of your requests. So thank you, and I'm going to now pass it to Bonnie.
Thanks, Katherine. That was a great presentation. I enjoy working with Katherine very much because she helps out on a lot of our map collection materials. So I'm here to represent the work that we're doing in the map collection with regards to getting the word out about spatial materials to anyone who will listen. The name map collection may bring to mind stacks of old maps that show California as an island, or maybe oceans full of sea monsters, or maybe you're thinking of modern USGS topo maps that you use for hiking, or maybe census maps. Rest assured, we have those maps, and we have many more. We have maps on postcards, we have tactile maps for the visually impaired, we have battle maps, we even have a collection of maps on t-shirts. But the map collection is also home to a vast quantity of geospatial data, as well as the expertise to provide the guidance needed on using the data in research and in teaching. One of the most straightforward things that we can do is work with instructors to identify relevant maps, scan them, and incorporate those images into the course Canvas page. This is an example of some of the materials that we worked or incorporated into Kelly O'Neill's class on Imperial Russia. We can provide links to the library viewer of high-res images, which is what you're seeing here. This is a map of the Crimea, which will feature prominently later. And we can also help you do the research to find other materials in other collections. So again, this is another map of that was incorporated for the class, only this is from the David Rumsey Historical Map Collection at Stanford. So we can help with the research to find things that we don't have. We can provide links to see things that we do, and we can help get that all into your Canvas page. This service is really a surrogate for a traditional class visit. And what is lost when we do that is a sense of the materiality of the maps. So working with other library colleagues, we've been creating a number of different videos and images to help illustrate the scale of specific maps and atlases in ways that are more tangible. For example, how big is a map? Well, this is that map I was just showing you in the on the Canvas page, and I'm going to speed that up. I wish we had some Benny Hill music, but this is our map curator unfolding the maps and showing us how big this is. Katherine, look away because you're not going to like this part. He didn't take his shoes off. But it's a really nice way to get a tangible idea of just how large this map is. Dave is 6 feet tall, so that's a pretty big map. That sense, the context of the original item is lost when you're looking at it on the screen. Maybe you want to know how much it weighs. Some of these atlases are hefty objects. They're really hefty. This Ortelius atlas weighs as much as a very well-fed cat, or maybe 2 smaller cats. We also like to give people an idea of the variety of materials that we have. So 1 large Ortelius is greater than 3 small Ortelius atlases, which is greater than an iPhone. It's trying to come up with these ways of making these comparisons and bringing out the materiality and physicality of the items that we hope would increase engagement and give at least a better surrogate for the actual traditional class visit. Hopefully, the students will engage more with the materials this way. They'll start to think about, well, what was the purpose of the map? Why was it so big? How was it created? And where did the information in it come from? We also have a video of Dave comparing the size of that map to his car, which is very small. The map is large, car is small. Moving on from the paper map collection, as I said earlier, we aren't your grandfather's map collection. We house terabytes of data, and our librarians have the skills to incorporate spatial information into the classroom setting. Lately, we've been getting a lot of inquiries about the Storymaps platform as a presentation tool for student projects. Now, Storymaps is more about the story than the map, but it's a very flexible presentation platform that can tell a story using many kinds of media, including but not limited to maps. So what we have been doing is working with faculty members and instructors of all kinds to come up with an exemplar story map that will hopefully inspire the students about the tool and inspire them to start thinking and writing about a particular place. What we do is talk through the options, talk about the best choice for any particular goal, and most importantly, help ensure that the students don't get stymied by technological barriers. The Storymaps platform is good because it's a very low barrier to entry and it can do a lot of things. So we can add just plain static images. It happens to be a static image of a map, but it's not interactive with the exception of just showing it bigger. But we could do static images of just about anything. But we can also incorporate these interactive maps. So this is a great way for a student to add some context to the place that they're talking about. A very simple map. They don't have to create the base map. They just have to have their point of interest highlighted. This is the West End of Boston. And it builds an interactive map where you can zoom in and zoom out. The examples that I'm showing were actually part of an exemplar story map I created when speaking to Bruno Carvalho's freshman seminar called Back to the Future. The subject was how the past envisioned the future. So I focused on Boston's West End because it's an urban environment. How the past envisioned cities of the future. That's an important aspect. Because Boston's West End is an urban environment that had undergone a lot of planned change. So a lot of different visions of what the West End would be. That's where I got these examples. You can incorporate into story maps, swipe maps. I'm sure we've all seen these as a way to look at change over time. And the best part about this is that the zoom in, zoom out also works here and the two sides are linked. But you can envision this being used for images as well, say photographs that were taken from the same geographic location. You could put one on each side and use the swipe for that. We can add interesting slideshows, which is a great way to kind of add more content without having to really disrupt the flow. So this is a lateral scroll looking at the West End. Is 1964, which you can scroll through or you can just skip over it and go back and look at it later. So it does allow for kind of a sidebar type of addition to the presentation. You can incorporate audio either inline or as background audio. You can visualize or think about a class where students are recording podcast episodes or interviewing people, and the story map would be a great place to highlight the audio and also build some context around it. In both of those cases, you really would want to think about contacting the library's virtual media lab because they are a fantastic resource for helping with creating those kinds of audio experiences. Finally, we have map tours, which can be built in, which is a great way to tell a story sequentially. As in, this happened here, this next thing happened over here. Honestly, I could see putting something together that would show the events of last week, of moving from the White House to the Capitol, and what happened where, and even given all the GPS locations that are available for inside the Capitol, this would be a perfect way to highlight telling that story. So paper maps, story maps are only part of the services that we can offer, help you achieve your goals in engaging the students and in introducing them to the idea of thinking about the space where they're studying. If you want to get in touch with us, I don't have it on my slideshow or oh, that was a story map, by the way. And I didn't put it in my story map, but we're at maps@harvard.edu. So I will now pass it over to Fred.
I'm Fred Birchted. I am in the Services for Academic Programs department, and we help professors in a variety of departments. Each of us has their own subject specialty with their classes. I work mainly with the history and history of science departments. This semester, I'm working with about 20 or so classes, doing research guides, doing consultations, answering email questions. I'm going to talk about some work we did last semester for Zachary Nowak, who's a lecturer in the history department. His course called History 1852, The Game, College Sports as History, which is basically a course on applying historical methods to college sports. Now, this actually had its origin last year. He taught a course, History 1636, Introduction to Harvard History. And for that course, he had several archivists and librarians around campus isolate and select collections in their repositories that they thought relevant to the course. And then the students in the course would go around would choose something that interested them, go to that repository and examine these archival collections and use them for primary sources for their papers. Now, for this course, of course, we couldn't do that. And so he shifted a bit and he restricted the number of libraries. He just worked with Harvard Archives and Schlesinger. And so what happened is that Tamar Brown and Sarah Hutchin of Schlesinger selected some appropriate archival collections. Ross Mulcair at the University Archive selected collections there. They sent them to the Imaging Services Department and had them digitized. And then we had them linked from this guide, which was designed by Anna Asagba, who works with me on historical material, and then are linked from this guide that we did, linked by topic. That was one mass of primary sources that they worked with. Zach also coordinated a large number of former Harvard alums who had done sports in college, and they did oral histories of these people. And that was the other set of primary sources that the students worked from. What Anna and I did was Anna designed this guide. We did a class session, as we usually do. We went to the class, well, in this case, as a Zoom visit, and gave explanations on how to find sources in their areas. We made 2 Zoom videos on how to use short Zoom videos, recorded Zoom sessions on how to find Hattie Trust material. Anna did one and I did one. We also answered email questions and did consults. The students would email us, and if they had a short question, we'd email them back the appropriate answer, or we would send them some hours we were available, and they would come back, choose hours they wanted, and they would come. We would schedule a Zoom session, and we would work with them for about an hour or so and discuss their topics. In this case, their primary sources were mainly the oral histories and the archival material. So we spent most of our time in our consults and emails doing contextual work, trying to contextualize this. There's these central primary sources.
I wanted to wrap things up on the library side and start off by acknowledging that what we're representing right now is the wonderful work that Faculty of Arts and Sciences librarians have been doing on behalf of FAS courses. And of course, Harvard Library goes beyond the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. We have many professional school libraries and special libraries. And just briefly want to acknowledge that work as well, though we're not showcasing it right now. If some of you have followed the Into Practice newsletter from HILT, I just will remind you, for example, the Harvard Graduate School of Education was mentioned in that newsletter, working with Professor Deborah Jules Sherman on her course, The Workplace Lab for System Level Leadership. And there they worked closely to prepare students for a trip that they did for the course. And they helped to identify relevant research that was really instrumental in helping them complete this, this trip. And so much more, of course, our Kennedy School colleagues, law school, and so forth. And I'll just briefly mention some other things that we didn't have time to demonstrate for you in depth. Although the virtual media lab did come up today, it's something to make you aware of, and you can register for it. They provide a lot of help from workshops to office hours. You can even walk in during their office hours with no appointment. You can receive from them copyright guidance on using media. They will recommend various hosting platforms depending on what kind of work you'd like done. They offer consultations to help you think through media assignments and assessment of media assignments. And they can help you to use tools like Panopto, Canvas, and Zoom, and so forth. So check them out. Also, it came up in particular in Lainey's talk about the Peabody Museum libraries, the Peabody Museum support for classes. And the library does make use of 3D scanning now. A lot of options are available to you. So for example, in a biology class, students might be able to view a three-dimensional model of a cell rather than a drawing or a description. In an art history class, they could examine a 3D sculpture virtually and get that full view. And you could even walk through historical architecture at human scale. And Harvard undergraduates got to do this in one course in spring 2020. So there's a lot possible here. And as Lainey mentioned, you know, there are drawbacks not being able to engage in person, but it also allows you a different access in a way you might not have been able to explore an object even in a face-to-face format. So please check that out. I have the URL in the lower left here. Some of you may not be aware that the library also provides support for qualitative research. So if any of your projects involve asking students to go out and into the field and interview participants in a research project, we are very happy to provide support for that, from helping them transcribe interviews to also helping them think through how to operationalize their research questions. We provide a lot of sources and texts on ethics and such. Plus, for data analysis afterward, we provide support for qualitative analysis software, in particular NVivo, but other platforms as well. And of course, don't forget to link to us through your Canvas course site. You can add a librarian to your Canvas course. And there are many things a librarian can do for you there, help you troubleshoot your reserves list, add library research guides like the one Fred was showing, and also interact with your students through the online messaging systems, among other things. And Bonnie was showing you some maps. Maps have been scanned and made available in Canvas courses and some of our other special collections materials as well. Just to show you that we do library research guides, and here is an example of one that is embedded in a Canvas course. And we have a special guide created just for faculty and teaching fellows. The URL is listed at the top, and we can paste it in later too. So if you have questions about fast course support, please don't hesitate to contact a librarian, and you can also make use of this guide. And like the museum, our museum colleagues stated, we would love to collaborate more with them in support of your courses. If you do want to see what workshops we have coming up, we have a few more next week, and I think maybe even something tomorrow. You can check any of those out by visiting these pages, and we'll welcome last-minute registrations. So thank you. And we'd love to hear your questions.
So yes, we just have time for maybe one question. I want to make sure I get most of us to be able to answer. What's one thing that you did because of the pandemic that you want to continue after the pandemic? I'm going to turn this to Jen first, as the person who said the silver linings. What's one thing that you did because of the pandemic that you want to continue?
I think I'd like to use more materials that we have digitally in either in a flipped classroom context. I mean, obviously it depends on the goals of the course, how much you want students to look before they get into the class, how much you want them to know before. This is the element of surprise. But either to use those digital resources, supplementary resources in a flipped classroom model, or to use them as supplementary materials in other ways, sending them away with students afterwards, using them in an assignment, something like this. So we could continue to use our existing digital resources, which we have a lot of, as really like a core of part of our teaching, and not just something that also happens to exist on our website.
Good. So not just using digital resources, not as just as a plan B substitute for those who can't happen to come to it in person, but actually making them core of the course. Good. Something else, somebody else.
I would say from a conservator's point of view, we tend to be a very analog crowd. And I think this past year has really forced us all to embrace technology and explore technology. Some of us kicking and screaming. And the things that we've been able to accomplish now with those tools in our toolkit have been really surprising. So I think to continue to embrace those and explore further, would be my takeaway.
Very good. So even if your collection was produced by those for whom the printing press was a new technology at the time, for us embracing the new and the digital can be very rewarding. Good. Somebody else. We just have maybe 3 more minutes. Someone else something you want to make sure you continue.
Hi. I was one of the people who worked with the text and transition class before I got to preservation at the archives. And one thing I thought was great, although I'm not sure how many of the students utilized it, was being able to link them up with the content that we were going to look at before they came to the classroom, even if they come and look at analog. Because I can't remember, I think Katherine had said this, like they can get a much closer view of it and look at the details, which I think was nice for me, because handling some of the documents that we show them is not always easy, either because they're delicate or because there's so many of them and they don't have time. So even just always kind of incorporating that into their syllabus and Canvas, so they can take a peek at it either before or after if they're interested in it.
This is a very nice point. I mean, this is the point that many instructors are saying throughout the campus and the faculty, is that in Zoom, everyone's in the front row. Well, this is now also true for the collections. For everybody, this material is a screen's worth away. It's whatever resolution. This immediacy, all right, a filtered immediacy, but it's still something that potentially can be taken advantage of. Good. There's maybe one more before we close. What would you want to continue? It's been a challenging time. The time will end. what are you going to do differently because of it?
Well, I would just add that a lot of times students assume, particularly those in the humanities, assume that they need to come into the building, and we very much encourage that. We want them to use the text there. But this has really pushed us as research librarians to locate as many digital copies as we can for people. And in teaching qualitative research, also thinking of Zoom as a platform for interviewing, I don't think that's going away. It may change, but this opens up new ways of reaching out to people that we can do when the time calls for it. Sometimes that's better. You're able to elicit a different kind of information that way. And as research librarians, going back to that, we very much want to encourage faculty and students to be creative. I think this challenge of not being able to get in touch with the physical copies has really pushed people to think creatively, possibly reshape their research questions. And we as librarians are very happy to help them in that process and sort of troubleshoot, help sift through what's available in databases, and help people come to a solution for, how can they still get their research done? So much is available online that is often possible, even if it's not the preferred way to do it.
Very good. Thank you, Ramona. I mean, this is true just in general. This, as we're seeing here, as this group of experts have joined us, our folks have joined us because as librarians and museum specialists, they want to reach out. They're not just waiting for you to come to their building, and they're not, going home and just reading a book because the building is closed. These materials are accessible to all of the Harvard community, and I want to thank everyone in this group for joining us and taking the time today. And thank you all for joining us throughout this week's showcase of Teaching in Unprecedented Times. We will soon publish links to recordings of all 6 events. In the meantime, we recommend the dozens of videos newly recorded by Harvard instructors in our Teaching Innovations Gallery. For details, go to vpal.harvard.edu/vpal-events. Good afternoon, everyone, and best wishes for the spring semester.